Welcome to the Creative Life Podcast. My name is Caroline, and I am your host. Today on the podcast, we have my very good friend, Mary Speight. Now, Mary and I met in grad school in Texas, and both of us are music educators, but we exist in very different parts of the music education spectrum, if you will. And so I really wanted Mary to come on the podcast to share her perspective about teaching music in public schools, and specifically big public school band programs. Now, I know band programs are a big part of a lot of people's lives and school lives and music lives. And so I wanted to really have the perspective of somebody who knows that world really well, like Mary does. So I'm really excited that Mary came to share her perspective on that world and what it means to teach in the creative arts in that context, and what the challenges and the joys are of that kind of work. So without further ado, here is Mary Speight. Oh, Mary, thanks for coming to talk on the podcast today. It's great to see you. Would you start us off by telling everybody what do you do? What's your job, life? What are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I'm in year 4 of being at a music education nonprofit. It's based in El Sistema. It's very loosely El Sistema inspired for anyone who understands the El Sistema model. We are in Texas, and yeah, I'm the program director. I've had a new title every year, but that's all good. Mostly what I do is I work with teachers that are teaching artists in our program, who are usually people who are performers by trade and either have an interest or some experience in teaching, and especially teaching in a program like ours, which is often has an angle towards social impact. And I also work with the partner directors that are the teachers at the schools that we partner with. And so most of those are public school band and orchestra middle and high school teachers. We also partner with some charter school programs in Texas, and supporting them in their programs. My background is I spent 10 years in North Carolina and Texas as a band director, both in Title I schools. Middle school and high school, and then decided I really wanted to help work with teachers and teaching. And that's kind of my real enthusiasm and real excitement, is helping teachers to refine their craft. I'm a bassoonist. I started playing piano when I was in 3rd grade, clarinet in band in 5th grade, and then switched to bassoon in high school. I started playing in a local orchestra again because I left public school and I had a little bit of time. So, yeah, that's kind of me. And I also have done a lot of visual art, just dabbling, always was kind of a hobby of mine, sketching, a little bit of painting, and more recently, more interested in kind of digital sort of art.
Oh, fun. Oh, nice. Nice. So you're always kind of doing little, I remember I've seen a lot of your artwork I've seen over the years is fantastic. It's your hidden talent. You keep.
It's very hidden right now.
But it's
hidden from myself as well.
I know, I mean, you spent many, many years in the schools, in a school every day in a classroom with big band groups. If anybody's not familiar with public school band in North Carolina and Texas, these are enormous groups of children and youth teaching instruments too. Sometimes just you in a room with 50 kids, right? I mean, it's a big deal. But are you in the classroom as much now?
Not
are
as
you in
much.
A school every day, or what's your day-to-day like?
My day-to-day has been changing quite a bit, and then with a kind of a new role, I spend a lot more time working a little bit with teachers. A lot of times it's just communicating virtually to avoid having to travel back and forth. Trying to meet with a few of our teachers that are younger teachers at least weekly. I will go in and I will substitute for some teaching artists on occasion, or sometimes it's what I enjoy doing, is getting in front of the kids. And I've been trying some new things with being more of a clinician. I'm using the air quotes, clinician sort of going in and not having an established relationship with students. And what does that look like? Because so much of my experience as a teacher was built on relationships and built on building trust, and that over time. And I never have felt like I'm that person that goes in and makes a huge impact. But I'm trying new things. I often find myself going in just to help out. Here I am, use me how you need me, and helping out. And these students don't know who I am. And it's like, what can I do to establish some sort of relationship and trust in the next 5 minutes so that we can have a productive 45 minutes or something like that. So that's been new and different. I feel like I'm in a school probably at least a couple times every week, but sometimes it's to talk to the teacher and sometimes it's to jump in front of some students. I also teach privately a couple of students just in my own home. So I feel like I'm intentionally trying to not get so far out of the classroom, which it doesn't take long to forget what it's like. That's for sure.
True. That's true. Well, because it is very much a rhythm, and it's a pace, and it's like running a marathon in a lot of ways, where if you aren't doing it, training for that all the time, your brain slows down.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Well, how did you end up becoming a band teacher? I mean, you were a band kid, if you will, if you'll pardon the term, band kid. But then, did it just feel like what you always wanted to do, or was that clear to you at a young age as a bassoonist or an instrumentalist, or where did it hit you?
I was super late to make that decision. Not so late that it was, financially challenging in college, but it was my senior year of high school before I made that decision. I had planned for years to be a vet. I was accepted to the school you go to in North Carolina to study pre-vet. I'd had a scholarship. I was ready to go.
I didn't know that. I never knew that.
Yeah. It was about halfway through my senior year that I was volunteering at a local vet, dog and cat vet, and I just was kind of bored. I was like, I don't think this is supposed to. I mean, I sat in on a surgery. I was that person that they asked to sit with a dog that they had to put down. And I just was like, I feel like I should feel more than this. And I just kind of was a red flag for me that maybe this isn't what I wanted to do.
Oh, interesting.
And even when I was interested, I worked in a zoo when I was in middle school. And so I was interested in that. I did. It was a local
zoo. How'd you have a job in middle school?
I mean, it was more of a volunteer thing, but they let you kind of hang on and keep helping out and things like that. It felt very much like a job. We were doing the dirty work. But I was like, and that's what I wanted to do, but that takes even longer. And I was like, is the class load and is doing this going to be exciting enough for me? And I decided not. And in the meantime, I had been there's just been a lot of things stirring up about teaching. And so I remember very clearly saying, all right, this is what I want to do. I want to teach. And sitting and saying, what will I teach? I was like, well, I'm pretty good at math. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Duh, I should teach music, right? I am a band kid. It's been my whole life just about. But it was not, I need to do music with the rest of my life. It was, I want to teach.
Oh, interesting.
And even in undergrad, that distinction was very obvious to me from beginning. Of so many people, they love this school music experience that they have. It's such a rich part of their high school that's what they want to do. And they often don't know what that means. They say, I don't know if I want to teach. I don't know if I want to perform, but I want to be a part of this still. And it's kind of this music thing just made such an impact on me that I want it to be my life. And I kind of felt like on the other side of yeah, I love this music thing, but I really want to teach. And music is just the venue that I want to use to achieve this bigger goal of education, which I very strongly believe in. So I don't think either of those are right or wrong, but there's definitely a difference in when you
Yeah.
come at it from a performance-based angle versus a teaching-based angle.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I would say I'm the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I was somebody who was a performer who kind of found teaching by accident,
Mm-hmm.
and then was like, "Oh, this is great. This is a
Yeah.
lot more interesting than waiting tables." Right?
Right.
Right.
Well, you
Yeah.
weren't a performer in waiting tables, but I guess that's sometimes what you have to do,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's what you do to make money.
Yeah.
When I was
Right.
traveling to New York and trying to perform, and you end up being a waitress.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to jump ahead, but it's interesting because people like that are who I'm working with now. And these artists that are coming at education from a different side.
Yeah.
Whereas I not only came through the education route, but I epitomized the education route, right? I was the like, but what about students? But what about education, right?
Uh-huh.
Whereas the conversations were often like, oh, this piece is so great. It's so wonderful to play. And I'm like, but what are students learning from it? You know? And what I'm finding right now is that people who teach in public schools are often people who were served by public schools. And I feel like I'm very much that. Like, I thrived in public school. I was very successful. I'm a great student. When I left being a student was when it was like, what do I do with my life? But so teachers that are in public schools are usually the ones who really thrived in that environment. And I'm working so much now with people who did not thrive in that environment and are looking for some
Oh,
alternate way. And it's fascinating to see how that is reinforcing whatever system is in place in public school, because people who weren't served by public schools are not interested in being a part of that system. And
that's
so
very
I'm,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, with the L Sistema nationally in the United States as well as globally, very different philosophies, very different approaches. And often they were the ones that were not served by public schools, but are doing fantastic things and still want to be part of this
Mhm.
teaching and impacting students.
I do wonder too if there's an element of like, if for somebody who may not have, as you said, like thrived or felt comfortable in public schools, or maybe wasn't even in a public school, maybe had a different
Mm-hmm.
school experience. Maybe some of it is eye-opening and restorative in a way to now come in and teach in a public school and maybe have a positive experience in.
Yeah, or feel like they can be a part of a change, or be
Yeah.
a part of,
Right.
I can tell that this student does not have the best relationship with the director, but
Yeah.
here I am, and I can help show that student that there are more ways than what this person is telling you or how this person is sharing it to you, that music is much bigger than this,
Yeah.
or just education or school is much bigger than this. And that's really interesting as well. A lot of times our teaching artists that are working in public schools, and specifically the state public schools, where there's a little bit more expectation and structure that fits this specific model, that you can tell that they really kind of are looking for the ones who they connect with, those outsiders and those ones that may not fit the mold, to help them to just feel like, that's okay. You don't have to
Yeah.
fit the mold, and you can still do what you want with this.
Can you tell, for the sake of the listeners and for the sake of me, what is a band classroom like? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, I mean, that's a big question, but what is teaching band like? Because if you didn't participate in band, I think it's a very unusual educational thing, right? Could you just talk a little bit about that? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I will kind of use Texas as sort of the example, because
well, Texas
Texas,
is top band
yeah,
country. Sorry, Florida and Ohio, but I think
well,
Texas
Texas
is
has
real serious
figured,
top band. Yeah.
yeah, it's a system, and it is a system that Texas has really aimed to refine and, for better or for worse, really perfect. And that system is when you are a fifth grader, you are invited to try out instruments to try. And this is often orchestra as well. But I will say that in the surrounding Austin districts, band is still kind of king, partially because football is king. And where football is king, marching band, it has to go along with it, right? And so I could talk a little more on the orchestra side of the differences in a little bit, but with my experience, it starts within fifth grade that you are invited to try an instrument. Actually, you're invited to try all the instruments. So you go, and there are dozens of students that are going around from station to station trying each and every instrument. And you are scored on that instrument. And then you go, and then based on that, you talk to the director. Some students come with a really strong, this is the one I want to play. And some students are very open. Some are somewhere in between.
When you say scored on the instrument, what do you mean by that?
Right. So often that score looks like something like born to play or struggled a little bit to make a first sound or no sound came out. And what the director does with that is kind of specific to each program. What I did with that versus what I've seen others do with it is different. But the idea behind that is that a student that shows that something was very easy right away may be a student that finds early success that's motivating for.
Yeah.
A student that has some challenge, it doesn't mean that they won't be successful, but it may mean giving that student sort of it looks like some things made this challenging, but if you're really interested, we might be able to work around it. But what it also allows the director to do is to get their perfect instrumentation of what they want. So, like I say, it's kind of a system. So in fifth grade, they are starting to think about, what do we want this top group to look like in eighth grade? And also, we have a responsibility to help feed this high school program. So they're already thinking about what is the right instrumentation for a strong band program.
And you mean like I'm going to have these instruments I need to fill. I'm going to have this many of this instrument.
Yes.
So I'm looking for the best matches for these, for this to make this number of instruments to make my band in the ensemble that I need. So the score is not to say someone should or shouldn't take band. The score is to
usually by the time they're there, they've already signed up for band.
So they're coming. It's not so. Yeah, I just don't want anybody to misunderstand that it's not like an admission score. It's more of a. Correct. It's more of a instrument assignment tool. Okay, so are children choosing their instruments, or is it sort of like then they're being, or does the instrument kind of choose them in that way, or they get kind of guided, or what happens in most cases?
Yeah, I think it's very much dependent on the student, very much dependent on the program. And like I say, I'm explaining kind of this system that is very common, and I'm trying to intentionally avoid positive or negative terms because I have thoughts. I have thoughts and either way.
I'm sure that people do it differently. You're just describing what you've seen happen in many band programs. Gotcha.
Correct. And so, like I say, some students come and they know exactly what they want to play, but they'll play along and they'll try everything. Or some students, they really get excited when they do something really well right away. And that's the catch.
We all do. I understand that. Yeah.
Right. And how they got students to sign up may have been something like an instrument trial. I've done that as well, where students are not sure what elective they're going to take. And that can be really impactful because this instrumental music thing is very intimidating. And to have an adult say, wow, this seems easy to you.
You could really do this, right?
Makes me feel like, oh, I can do this, as opposed to this professional that makes it look so easy, right? And then other students, they're pretty open, and it can be guiding is one way to say it.
Mhm.
Manipulating might be another way to say it. But it's depending on the needs. Some schools, it then becomes, and here's where you get your instrument to rent. Other schools, they have the instruments, and
Oh,
there's this understanding. So sometimes the instrument that's offered is because the schools only have so many of X
sure.
instruments
I've
as
only
well.
got 10 flutes. I can only have 10
Right.
flute pairs.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And
So,
yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but so I was not a band kid, as I mentioned. I was a choir kid. And so it's a very different situation. You don't have the instrument issue. It's not, you do have the voice range issue of maybe being placed in which part you're going to sing in a given year, right?
Right.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is that most beginner band classes, like so sixth grade, like if you're doing these instrument interviews in fifth grade, it's to start sixth grade, middle school in most public schools, right? But
Typical.
most
Yes.
of them who come to band are total beginners,
Absolutely.
right? Whereas in choir, most of them have sung before.
Right.
And in orchestra, a lot of them have played their string instrument.
I will say that's dependent on
Maybe
where you are.
that might be a regional thing too, where they might have had
Yeah.
opportunities to play a string instrument
Right.
at a younger age.
In the schools we work at, it's almost always the same. Like they're coming
Okay.
as complete beginners.
Yeah.
And then in these programs where they're very large, it's usually the vast majority come in as complete beginners.
I taught in New York for a long, long time, and it was
Right.
band was scarce. In New York City, I should say. Band was scarce, and orchestra was very common, and private instrumental lessons were quite common. So it was you did have a lot of students who started middle school orchestra who had been playing for quite a while. Whereas,
and I find that with
that's not the case. So it just depends. Maybe it depends on where you are, and
correct. There are probably some where they all started in some sort of Suzuki program or similar sort of program very young, and then are going in. But many of the public schools, they will get a few of those, whereas the vast majority are coming in from scratch.
So when you start a class in sixth grade, they're, for the most part, total beginners.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And
so
then, right. And then you are, then is where the system really is playing, right? Of you are responsible for building new skills on how you hold your embouchure, which is the way that you hold your mouth and your tongue and the mouthpiece or the reed or whatever instrument, or if you're a percussionist, how you grip the mallets and how you approach things. So you're learning brand new skills that are, for the most part, not very natural and take a lot of body awareness. And you're also learning to read music, which is happening more and more for the first time in these sixth grade programs. Yes, they have elementary music, but due to the nature of how often they meet and what that curriculum looks like, a lot of times students will come and they are learning these basics of reading music for the very first time.
I think that's a key point we should reiterate, because if people are not familiar with public school music, in most elementary school programs, you might see your music teacher once a week for 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, and that's it. Whereas in band, you have longer periods of time, middle school band, longer periods of time, and you might see them multiple times a week. So there's
also this element of classroom management with elementary music because of that. They want to engage in the things that are going to engage everybody fully.
Yes.
Right away. And attention spans and things like that, sitting down and doing music theory may not be what that teacher is either feeling like they're going to be successful with, or feeling where students are leaving feeling like they are enjoying what they're doing.
As somebody who's always taught elementary and early childhood, I mean, making beautiful music and having beautiful music experiences is the primary driver for so many of us, because we know that that's the takeaway. So so you have a sixth grade group. You're starting most of the time from the basics of note reading and theory.
Correct.
And the basics of instrumental technique.
Yes. And in these large programs, you are learning only or mostly with people who play the same instrument as you. So it's very focused on instrument specific practices in that first year.
All right. So you'd have your flutes all together. You'd have your clarinets all together. Okay.
Yes. And it may be like the flutes and the trumpets and the percussionists are all in the same class period, but there are 3 teachers. And so there are 3 classes happening at the same time, and they are digging in deep. So that first year is intended to really get them as far as they can on their instrument as possible. Because that first year is the only year where they're going to have just their other instrument. Like I said, this is the common and the goal. Schools with less teachers, with less resources, and pretty much the rest of the country, that's not the case. They're learning with probably all the instruments, or at least maybe the flutes, clarinets, and the saxophone woodwinds are together, something like that. In my experience has been both.
How did your 6th grade class in North Carolina look when you first started teaching? How many children did you have in those groups? And
in North Carolina, I was in a school that had just split. So it was not as large as it had been the year before I got there, right? But we had woodwind class and brass class. So our beginning 6th grade was split over 2. I want to say there were between 40 and 50 in those classes.
So you would have 40 or 50 children by yourself.
Yeah.
Doing these things on these instruments.
I worked with another teacher that taught at the high school, but he was only able to come over and help occasionally. I also had percussion in there, so it was incorporating that. I work in schools now where everyone's in the same class, and I work in situations like I just described, where each instrument is only working with that instrument, which what you can get through in a year when you're only teaching one instrument versus what you can get through in a year when you're teaching 6 or 7 instruments, totally different, right?
Right.
But the idea with all of them is that after that first year, you go into a band class where you are in a band. All the instruments are together. That might be a 7th and 8th grade band, or some schools it's, only 7th graders are together, only 8th graders are together, things like that. And you are doing more in playing music together, putting it all together for performances and things like that.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of practicality and functionality that has to be in place to keep classes like this that you're talking about moving forward, right? There's probably a lot of good old-fashioned educational pedagogy stuff, like we're goal setting, we're doing, formative assessment throughout this thing to make sure everybody's on track, and I have a goal here that we're trying to reach. I mean, did you feel like there's much room for error in these classes? I mean, I'm hearing it as a teacher and I'm thinking like, okay, you've got to stay the course. You've got to have your plan every day and be really on top of it because it could go off the rails very easily.
I will say what I felt as a teacher is a lot of pressure. A lot of whether or not that pressure was actually came to fruition or not. There's a lot of pressure for by the end of the first year, your students should be here. And by the end of the 2nd or 3rd year, your students should be here. In order to help the high school program continue to grow, you need to make sure that you are retaining this many students. So not only do they have to be at a certain level, I have to make them want to stay with it. And
it's a feeder. It's a feeder.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so part of this, like pedagogy and this skill base is also this culture building so that when things like sports in Texas, you cannot do sports in 6th grade in public schools. So it's like 6th grade is that time of year to get them bought in so that when 7th grade comes around, you might want to do both, but you're not going to say, well, I'm only going to do sports.
I see.
You're bought in enough that you want to stick with it. And different programs take that different ways. They specifically try to keep one of their groups targeted as those students who are just hungry to grow. And they may want to specifically keep one of their groups for students who this isn't their entire life, but they like it and they want to be a part of it.
Uh-huh.
And others don't do that. And others don't have the option. They're all in one group due to size or teacher constraints or things like that. So it looks a little bit different, but in general, it doesn't look that different in that a class is getting students prepared typically for some upcoming performance.
Okay. And when you talk about like building the culture, and I guess this could be a question about like your experience as a teacher, but also your experience as being a community member in band, right?
Right.
What do you think helps build the culture? I mean, what is that? Is that something that's teacher driven, or is that something that's student driven, or a little bit of both, or is that intentional, or is it just, how does that happen?
Yeah, I would say there's what I've seen, and there's what I tried to do, and there's kind of like what resonates with what I'm aware of with just teaching and brain and learning and things like that. And what I've seen is kind of the range, right? Of very much, this is what it means to be a student in this program. Students in this program, X, Y, Z. And I have gone into programs where I said, I would not have survived in this program because I don't feel like I fit that model. And that is where you can get into a lot of problematic things, right? Of there may be conscious bias towards certain types of students, take that however you want, or more often there may be unconscious bias, right? I had a mentor that very specifically would go to students in 5th grade and saying, if you are an A student, band is totally for you. If you are kind of a C or D student, you might want to consider something else.
Whoa.
We know that there is no correlation among, like success as a musician in the very large term, success as a creative, success as an artist. However, to be successful in that band program, that is what that teacher wanted. And
gosh, I have a lot to say about that. I have just a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to take up the whole podcast.
Absolutely. Right. And so say, you got to reel me if I start to go off the rails.
That might be a whole other episode right there.
Right. But that's not always the norm. I can say, like, I've seen that, and I've seen it in a very teacher driven, this is what it means to be this program. Right. And then I've also seen where maybe it started that way and then it's just kind of snowballed. And snowball is usually in a negative term. I don't mean it that way, of like students like to do this and the teacher went with it. And now that's like part of the culture. And it's just kind of a fun, silly sort of thing with that sort of thing. It can still sort of perpetuate this idea of this is the group. And if you don't quite fit this, maybe a little bit different. And then I've seen teachers come into a school as a new teacher that had a really either a negative culture or just know this is what it means to be a part of it and trying to build that. And man, it's challenging. It's so much easier to start something brand new and shiny, or to keep something going with momentum. But creating that from scratch when it maybe has been either negative or non-existent in the past is really challenging. A lot of what I kind of talk about with teachers is around the idea of the self-determination theory, which is around motivation coming from having 3 things in place. One is this sense of relatedness or belonging or community. Mm-hmm. One is the sense of voice, agency, ownership, autonomy.
Okay.
And one is the sense of competence and feeling like I can be successful.
Yeah.
And with that relatedness, it doesn't have to be specifically with the teacher. It doesn't have to be specifically with peers, but they need to find that they fit there. And so some programs do a really good job of kind of defining who fits here. And then some cultures or some schools do a great job, and directors and programs of adapting whatever they need to let that student feel like they belong. And both of those things can be challenging. And one of those things can be even harder, but helps to make all students feel like they sort of fit.
Do you think it's generally inclusive? Like, do most people that end up there feel that they fit? Is there a lot of attrition over the years from band?
I don't want to misrepresent some of the research that's been done, but typically it seems like there are certain students that are more likely to continue and that there are students that are less likely to continue. That schools with diverse populations, it tends to be that the band program is maybe less diverse. And kind of learning to understand how to change that or understand where that's coming from is kind of part of conversations that have been happening in Texas and in other places as well. And I think that there's definitely an element of, I was that person that the social aspect was a big part of it for me. I really enjoyed it. I remember when I was going from 8th grade to 9th grade year, I pretty much was told I needed to make the decision between art and band. And my thinking was, I will continue to do art on my own, but I like making music with friends. And I like, I like the harmonies. I like the group dynamic of music. I was also like on a sports team, and I used that phrasing very intentionally. I was on a sports team. And so it wasn't like that was satisfying the group thing for me. So there was something uniquely about playing music in a group. And, and I stuck to it, and I did continue to do art on my own, and I continued to be in the band program. And I ended up moving, and the band was where I fit in. Ended up going to college, and, we start marching band before anyone else. And so, I absolutely do not intend to dismiss how important that social aspect is and how important it is needed and how much we do need to lean in on it. But at the same time, are we able to really include everybody with that?
So how do you think, I know in Texas music in general, competition and doing, those kinds of things as a part of the regular routine every year is widespread, and shall I even say the norm, that competition is the norm. That was my experience when I was in Texas. And do you think that that's something that is motivating for the students, or terrifying, or motivating for the teachers, or terrifying, or something else, something in between? What do you think is the purpose of all this competition?
I think that I am going to immediately reveal my cards, just so that you know where I'm coming from.
I was trying so careful not to reveal my cards with that question, but
okay. Well, I can pull back and not reveal my cards.
So lay them out
right away.
This is a friendly podcast audience. Lay them out, Mary.
I am a competitive person. Game night is very intense. But so there are students that thrive on that. And I will say that flat out competition really only exists in marching band regularly. That any other sense of competition is typically a little bit less obvious, right? Like in marching band competitions, you are ranked, and there is a winner, and there is finals, and there is advancing and going to the state level and things like that. So that is where competition truly exists, and that you are trying to score better than this group so that you can get a higher score, like competing against each other.
It's a sport.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. And with any coach, with any director. You've seen where I just listened to a great podcast with Kate Bowler and Coach K from Duke, right? And just an incredible leader, an incredible coach, highly winning, but also lost a lot. And just what are we teaching through winning? What are we teaching about grit? What are we teaching about resilience? What are we teaching about not settling and challenging ourselves and pushing through? And it's so exciting. And it's really a great way to bring people together and for one cause, which, let's just be honest, having anyone coming together right now in a positive cause doesn't happen a lot.
But you know what? The question I'm going to ask you is, what are we teaching about music and art and creative thinking?
We're teaching a lot about entertainment. And yeah, if you haven't seen the way,
interesting.
Right. Yes. So let's talk about marching band in Texas, shall we? The music usually gets started early summer and maybe end of the school year. Texas follows University Interscholastic League rules. So there are regulations on how much time you can spend. You can't start working on the field work until a certain date or whatever. But this process starts in May, June kind of thing. And then the season ends around late October, early November. 7 minutes of music, typically.
Gosh, okay.
So all that time, 7 minutes of music.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. But the skill level at such a high level in that time. So are there skills being taught? Absolutely. You know, like if you talk to drummers, percussionists, that's where it all is. Like the music that they play at the back of the band when you are, you know, playing an orchestral arrangement, you know, like they're falling asleep back there. It's just not as in your face exciting, right?
Yeah,
but
they have to wait through 48 measures of music for
absolutely for the triangle. Right?
We love you, percussionists. We love you.
Yes. But that's where it's
you're
at.
Right. Marching band percussionists really get down. They really, they have to. I mean, they're really good.
And they have to have this, like, there's a visual component, there's a movement component, you've got to be perfect. There's a lot of focus on precision. Precision.
Yeah.
Is and consistency. So, yes. Do we think that it's very important that music can be used to teach these character skills? Yes. Should it be the focus? That's always the question, right?
So I'm noticing that here we've talked now for 40 minutes about teaching band and the world of band and music and all of these wonderful things. But I think from an outsider who doesn't know what music education is actually like, right? If you're listening to this and you're not a music teacher or a musician, you haven't experienced this, you might assume that band and arts classes are where children are being able to think creatively, make creative decisions, expand their creative thinking skills. I think that's what many outsiders think about arts when they think of arts education, is that that's what it's doing. Do you think that that's actually what's going on in, say, a band classroom?
I will say that I have a tendency to find myself taking one of two stances in my work that I do. And one of those stances is music education advocate for administrators, for donors, for things like that, of the benefits of music education. On the other side, I work with teachers, and my job is to help critique how can we improve our art? How can we improve student outcomes? And so it's very easy for me to jump into that. Yes, we find that students find a creative outlet in the arts. And I will say, yes, that happens. I also will say that the way that we tend to measure success, in my experience, is by very non-creative means. And it's challenging because how do you assess the creative process in something that is sort of like a standards base? Like, how can you
Right.
assess that in the world of standardized testing, in the world of anything, right? And, we had talked about competition, and especially in Texas, there's the Concert and Sight Reading Festival, which is not competing with others, but kind of competing with yourself on how well you can play this selection of music. And so the music will go towards expression the rubric will go towards expression and other things in addition to skills. But ultimately, your success is how well you can perform this piece of music.
Meaning read the notes. Read and play the notes. In real time.
With each other and
Mhm.
become part of the ensemble in the appropriate way to make the composer's intent come out the most.
Okay.
And
A piece just to make this clear for the listener, you're talking about a piece they haven't seen before that
3
day.
pieces that they've prepared.
The pieces that they've prepared.
And then one that is
one that they haven't seen before, that they're sight reading. Okay.
Right. And so are things like expression important? Yes. Are things like being able to fit within, are you a soloist here or are you part of an ensemble? Do you have the most important part? And that understanding the different roles of musician is important. But ultimately, it's how is this piece performed at the end of the day?
But in the band classroom, is that the decision of the students or is that the decision of the conductor, i.e. the teacher? The expression.
The expression. That's the great question, right?
Yeah, like,
so
are the students really making those creative decisions?
That's where I am really trying to learn more about how can we teach teachers to do that more. And because I will say there are opportunities a lot of times in the system that we just kind of laid out there. The opportunities seem to be, the creativity is finding those opportunities, right?
Right. Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. There can be opportunities for who wants to try different ways to do this? Which one do we enjoy? Which one do we want? But in
bringing
my
them
experience,
into that conversation of what that
right.
But it takes an intentionality on the part of the teacher. Like it's not automatically there.
Right.
In the system unless the teacher makes a point to have that be a part of the learning. Right? Like,
yes.
Yeah, we've learned the notes, we've learned the rhythms, we've learned how to play our instrument. We're seated as an ensemble, we get through it. Now what do you think? I mean, that's
And I was talking to somebody not long ago that was like, now that we've done this, now the music making can happen. And like, isn't that backwards, right? How do we make the music making happening at the beginning / every step of the way? And the challenge, and this is where I, take on my empathizing with teachers, is that we weren't allowed to do that. I was not taught how to do that. I was not in my high school, my college orchestra, my high school, my college band, raising my hand saying, well, what if we tried it this? No.
Yeah, that's not right. That's what I'm saying. It's like, that's not our experience.
Right.
When did you as a player get to the point where you felt like you were making your own creative decisions about your playing?
I would argue I don't. I find that so many times I am, and this is where just being asked to be on, I said, well, I don't see myself as a creative person. And part of that, I think, is a reflection of what in music do we, attribute to creativity, right? And that is, there's the composers, people who are studying composition, and then there's the improvisers. And depending on where you fit, you may see that they are the elite few, or you may say, well, they're kind of the weirdos over there. But
it's separate.
it's kind of a separate thing. And I would say that so much of my creativity is in the problem solving side of music, right? How can I creatively approach this technical problem? And how can I creatively keep my practicing interesting and things like that? I may use different techniques to see how do I like this melodic line to be, but so often based on the music, there's kind of sort of the composer's intent. And our job is to sort of use the clues that the composer has left to try to find their intent, as opposed to, it's yours. Make it what you want.
It's your
Now, there
own.
are different interpretations. I mean, like you'll hear performers and that are at a much higher level than me that are really bringing their personality in, but they often meet criticism for it as well. So that's
That's
the other
true.
thing is that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in I'm going to say traditional, in air quotes, traditional music,
Mm-hmm.
that it's often sort of seen that that's the right and the privilege of people who have reached the peak of excellence to then be
Mm-hmm.
able to bring their own creative interpretation to something, that it's seen as presumptuous by those of us who have not achieved a certain level, right? Like you've almost kind of like, you've got to pay your dues a really, really, really long time to get the right to think
Mm-hmm.
creatively about
Right.
this piece, or to get the right to be a composer, or to get the right to be a conductor, right? That's sort of, it's like those are the peak jobs at the top
Mm-hmm.
of the music pyramid in a lot of ways, right? And
Right. Or it's your path from the start, right?
right, or your path from the start, exactly. Then you've been,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a good point. That you've been on that track. But
Mm-hmm.
it does seem as if, there are ways as teachers where we could make the creative decision making intentionally a part of the pedagogy from the start and keep it. I would say in early childhood and elementary, it is a part of the pedagogy. Generally
Yes.
speaking, in my experience, it is. So there's something about, in my mind, about ensemble structure and the requirements of what that job is, where it makes it increasingly difficult for
Mm-hmm.
teachers to make those insertions on a day-to-day basis. Is
Right.
that fair?
And I would say yes. And I think kind of going back to sort of what my work is more right now and working with teaching artists and being involved with more of these non-traditional, non-public school programs is seeing that sometimes people fall into two categories, that they're incredible teachers. They themselves were not really able to be super creative. And so they're incredible teachers, but they're teaching to a very specific outcome. And then others are creatives and they get frustrated. Like, why does it look like this? It shouldn't
Why do
look
I
like
have to do
this.
this? Yeah.
Right. But they don't know how to scaffold creativity. And that's the big thing that I always like to come to talk about with creativity, is that our students are not usually given a lot of opportunities to be creative in their school day, band or not, orchestra or not, arts or not. It's just kind of the nature of where we are as public education right now. And most would argue that it's very unfortunate, but it's the reality. And without these opportunities to scaffold, especially when people are coming from different cultures, especially when people are coming from different levels of how much am I allowed to have choice in my day, then just all of a sudden expecting students to be creative and getting frustrated when it doesn't work is reinforcing well, I'm not good at this, or
Uh-huh.
it's reinforcing this is not the space for it. So, like I say, this is where I empathize with teachers, because they're assessed on how well their ensembles perform. That's like, at the end of the day, whether or not it's the only thing they're assessed on, that's what they feel the most pressure on. Their time is getting more and more limited to do that. They feel like they need to make this a place where students feel like they belong in some sort of cultural way. And they themselves don't feel competent, or they feel like they are kind of a lone island of trying to do this other thing. And it can, it's challenging because it kind of limits these conversations. I think that there are a lot of teachers, and, I felt like I got there of being able to encourage creativity at the very shallow level. It's this idea of fostering, of recognizing when a student is wanting more and having the tools to help them that I will speak for myself, I didn't feel equipped to do. So I would often try to bring in somebody else, like, this person wants to write. I don't know where to take them next.
Yeah. Well, like, as you said before, like if the system has not developed this in the teachers through their own experience when they were in the system as students, how are they supposed to understand it now? I mean, do you think that most teachers want to be teaching in this way? Or do you get resistance from the teachers when you go with this direction, or is it more like they want to do it, they just don't quite know how?
I think I get a lot of resistance, and sometimes I see the resistance as fear. I don't have time. I have limited this, that, or the other. Kind of alluding to that. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for getting them here. We didn't talk about it, but getting students into music programs, huge pressure, especially for high school directors, right? Yeah. I have to get these to this certain level. And so there's that kind of resistance. And then I think that there's also the resistance of just really not knowing how to do it. Of even if they want to, not knowing how. A lot of it just even starts with not even being creative, just giving students opportunity to have voice, to take ownership. And, earlier I was talking about how I'm changing the way that I approach students because I'm coming in with less of a relationship, being not their regular teacher. And I find that just giving students opportunities for choices right away, they are usually like, I don't know. They shrug. They don't say anything. And then, once I can either scaffold that or just keep pushing and let the awkward silence happen until they are, then like, they warm to me much faster. Students want that, but they don't immediately know how to handle it. So I think a lot of it just even starts with just choice. And I think directors want that.
Yeah. And like you said before, if they don't have many opportunities in their school life or haven't had many, they may not even trust it, that it's a real, offer, or know how to answer the question. There may be a great, wait a minute, this is a teacher actually asking me what I think about this.
Yeah. And I was just listening to a clinic at the convention, that Texas Music Educator Association convention, about working with maybe immigrants or, students from other cultures. And sometimes being given a choice in a school is like totally not in a student's culture outside of the United States. But even sometimes in the United States, it's very much about compliance. And if I just go in and like, well, do we do this or this? It can be overwhelming. So even being able to scaffold, and I think that that's the challenge, is that with everything, with creativity, yes, it can be innate, but it also can be stifled. And so if we don't know how to scaffold that, it can be really challenging. You asked me a little bit about my personal I always kind of allude back to when I was in college. I took a jazz improv class because I was absolutely I was so bad at it. And, here I am, a bassoon, which is definitely not a jazz instrument. And so I go to class 1 and they give just, here are the scales to kind of build your foundation. And I come back the next week and I've learned my scales. And then the next class is, here are some typical jazz riffs that people will incorporate into their improv. Go learn them in all the keys. And I was like, okay, I got it. And then the next week was like, and now we just improv all day. And I was like, well, wait, what? Right? It was like we went from block 1, block 2 to like, just do it, right? And then so I would just do it, but I didn't feel like the feedback was, I don't know. The end of the story is it's the only class that I dropped in college, because I felt very quickly that like no one knew how to really break this down for me.
Sure. Nobody was teaching you how to do it. It was just like, just do it. That's not,
Right.
yeah.
And I was in a class of educators as well as students who were training to be educators. And I was like, this is very much teaching me. If you don't have it, we don't know how to teach it. And I was frustrated, but kind of like that sort of, and I've had those conversations with professional musicians, symphony players, of like, maybe they can teach us how to improv, and it's like, there's this, somebody's out there that is going to perfect this for us. But until then, there's not a lot of awareness of it. If you don't got it, here's how you build it. And
here's a system. Here's a system.
Yeah.
So, but do you think, I mean, I kind of think I know the answer to the question. Do you think that creativity can be taught?
I absolutely do. I don't think it's too late for me, but I have to prioritize.
It's not too. No, it's
not. Through my work, I'm kind of associated with, there's this program where the school district and this organization is trying to help bring creative arts strategies into non-arts classes.
Oh, cool.
Because they know that there's so many benefits that they bring to just relating to topics, deepening their understanding and things like that. The challenge there is that we're still using creativity for this non-creative ends, right? And so there's some challenge to that. But
depends on like what the definition of creativity encapsulates, right? Because math can be incredibly creative. I mean, the end result might be a number or a symbol or something, or whatever you're going for. But the process of it can be incredibly creative. So I think sometimes we feel, frustrated that as arts educators, we get this responsibility, the sole responsibility to be teaching creativity, which I think is wonderful. I love teaching people to be creative. It's not that. But I do feel like, well, wait a minute, it could be a part of all teaching. It could be a part of all education, that we could be the same skills of looking at something in a new way, finding your way through it, that's very process oriented and not as focused on a product.
I'm also connected with another organization that is really defining what are some of the things that we're aiming for in music education, and how can we break those down. And one of them is agency, and kind of breaking agency down into things like decision making and creativity and expression. And what does this look like at a low level? What does this look like at kind of a high level? So like, I think that there's efforts to that. The challenge is that you can't always see at the concert how they got there. And so it really is more on teachers or on supervisors or on administrators who often have no idea about the music classrooms that are happening in their school, much less what could be, right? It's all about the product, and not in a negative way. It's just, that's what we can see. And so, yeah, I mean, I very much think it can be taught, but like I say, with anything, it needs some scaffolding of steps along the way, of supports along the way, of,
it needs to be intentional. It can't be by accident. It needs to be intentional. Right.
Learning feedback that is helpful in somebody's creative process. I don't know if you're familiar with is it Liz Lerman has sort of the creative process rubric. And that's kind of what my role as a teacher is becoming, is the teacher coach, as a coach is becoming, is this, how do I help teachers say there are ways that they can creatively kind of help students get to this place that they're hoping to get them to, or maybe there's a way that they can help give students agency or feel this sense of voice that doesn't have a specific end goal in mind. that you can loosen the reins a little bit, because that's the other thing that we haven't talked about is student directed and teacher directed, and
Right.
how the old orchestra conductor on the podium is the epitome of a teacher directed program, and while the rest of the world is aiming towards more student directed, we in the music world find that we are struggling with what that looks like.
Well, the models of band and orchestra and choir are quite old. They've been in place for more than 100 years, those kinds of structures with the podium. Yeah. So,
and in the band world, military. So, yeah.
Right, of course. Yeah. Liz Lerman's thing is the critical response process.
Thank you. The critical response process. And it's intended to be for giving feedback and helping people in their creative exploration. It's really intended for fostering feedback for creative endeavors, as opposed to, well, you didn't point your toe this way, or the articulation was not quite there. It was more around helping the creative process.
Okay, before I let you go, tell me a little bit just about what do you see yourself doing next?
I think I'm not really sure what that answer is, but what really excites me is being a part of this solution, right? And so it's very easy for me to get lost in the problem. And when I want to say the problem right now is this inability to kind of shift towards a more creative, more student-centered, more giving students more voice and things like that, that I want to be part of the solution and be a part of what helps. So whether that is continuing in some sort of coaching format so that I'm making impacts locally, or in some maybe more broad of what are some of the systems changes that can happen, that need to happen, and what does it look like to be a part of that, I think would be interesting. I'm not interested in throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? There's so many, I wouldn't be here if the arts were not, and arts education and music education wasn't incredibly valuable. But I feel like that there's room for more. And I think that I'm excited about the ideas of what would be those steps. What would it look like if we really valued these things that we say that the arts do? Creativity and students feeling like they have a voice and social impact and those things that are exciting, that can go beyond just the skills and the performance and the social component of the arts.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Mary, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. If you'd like to know more about Mary and about the Creative Life podcast, you can visit our website. It's www.arts-collab.com/Creative Life Pod. And now might also be a great time to mention, if you're enjoying the Creative Life podcast, please share us with your friends and other people that you think might be interested in whatever platform they like to stream their pods. We're available on them all. And please also send us a review. Let us know what you think. Or even better, like, subscribe, follow, whatever you can. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, keep making stuff. Goodbye.